little backstory, little thing that we're going to touch on briefly here, and we're going to talk a lot more about next week. The whole concept of a kinsman redeemer. The law, the custom was that if I had a wife, and we're dreaming here, if I had a wife, and I was Jewish, okay, big stretch, and I died, my younger brother would have to marry her in order to give her worth and continue my lineage. She would, and his job.
Wasn't that only if your wife hadn't had children?
Yes.
Not that grown up.
Thank you. But you're right. If I hadn't had a kid, a son per se, more specifically, if I hadn't had any children with her and I died, my brother, well, this is a real stretch because he doesn't exist either, would have to marry her, have a child, and continue my lineage. So that child would be mine, but his. Really confusing. Jewish life was really confusing, but it worked. That's the way they did things. That's called a kinsman redeemer. I don't know if they do that now, but no. But that's the way their culture was. Because honor and shame, they lived in an honor and shame concept here. And their life was you either honored somebody or you shamed them. And if you didn't have any kids, you were ashamed. Whatever. And honor was very important, and your family honor. And there's a lot of problems in the Bible, a lot of family issues centered around that concept of not having a kid for my brother. It caused a lot of Maury Povich, Jerry Springer type episodes. A lot of family disputes happened. But here we go. And Orpah said, okay, I will stay home. And well, let me backtrack. Naomi says, I'm not going to have kids anymore. I have no more sons. All of my sons are dead. So I'm not going to have it. Even if I have another son, you're going to be old before they're marrying age. And there's no point being with me anymore. Move on. Go live your life. Be redeemed some way. And Orpah said, sure, that sounds like a good idea. You've convinced me. I'm going to leave. But Ruth, stubborn woman, stubborn Jewish woman said, or Moabite woman said the words, but it says she clung to her, and Naomi said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more. Also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. It's a commitment. I don't know any woman who would commit themselves to their mother-in-law like that. I have seen relationships. Yeah, I have seen their relationships with between mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws, and they don't really like each other sometimes. You stole my son. You took him off. You're not worthy of him. And I see a mother in the room shaking her head. You know, there's no woman that's going to be worthy of my son. My mom's just hoping that I find one that's semi-okay. My mom's just hoping that I find one that's breathing before I turn 40. Mostly because she wants more grandchildren than just my niece, but you know, it's okay. Where was I going with this? But here we have a woman who has devoted herself to her mother-in-law, somebody who she had no rights to, Somebody she had no reason to devote herself to. She could have just gone back home and cared for herself and lived her life and let Naomi figure out, because Naomi was going to be taken care of one way or another, because there was still Elimelech's family in Judah that was going to take care of her. There are rules, there are laws in the Bible that dictated how you dealt with widows, especially of Naomi's age. And they were good things, because you had to take care of them. You had responsibilities. You had to do something for them. But Ruth looked at Naomi, and for some reason, she stayed. And she connected. And she felt Naomi was, and she devoted herself to this friend of hers, to her mother-in-law. That's just mind-boggling. How many of us have people we would devote ourselves that way to? How many of us have people that we would sit there and say, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Where you stay, I'm going to stay. Whatever happens to you is important to me. It affects me too. I will follow, I commit myself to you in one form or another. Completely. I sit there and I think about this, and I ponder on them. And I wonder, how can we apply this to our lives? Should I say every mother-in-law, every woman should devote herself this way to a mother-in-law? No. Some of them aren't worth it. No offense to my mother-in-laws out there. Am I saying that this is the way we should live? Should I compare this to a marriage and say, this is how you should devote yourself to your husband or your wife? Well, yes. But how does that apply outside of the marriage? How does that apply to us, to me, to you? I may have more questions than I have answers. I know. What? You're the preacher. You're supposed to know everything, right? Well, I don't. And I'm going to be the first to admit it. But I think somehow we should take this concept, figure out how do we apply it to our lives. How can we change somebody's life if we commit ourselves to them? Maybe not to the extreme that Ruth did, that we're going to move into their house and we're going to go with them wherever they go and follow them wherever we follow them and do whatever we can do to redeem them, to give them value. But just because, just because Ruth saw that it was worth it, that Naomi was worth it, she decided to commit herself to him, and she saw value in Naomi that Naomi hadn't seen, that was no longer seen. Let's look at the last part of this chapter real fast. So the two of them went out until they came to Bethlehem, and when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity on me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. Now, names mean a lot. The name Naomi means pleasant. She says, "Don't call me pleasant anymore." Naomi was dealing with depression, anger, bitterness. Her entire male household died in another land. They're buried in another land. She says, "Call me Mara." Mara means bitter. So here's a woman who's going through deep, dark depression and saying, God has turned his hand against me. God hates me. How many of you felt like God hated you? I felt that way. How many people you know Do you know people who says God hates me? Yeah. And Ruth saw in Naomi and value, and Naomi didn't see anymore. And she committed herself to Naomi to figure out how to show Naomi that there's value in you. Ruth saw value in Naomi, and she said, I'm going to stick around till Naomi sees it. And value her. How do things get value? By people giving it to them. How are things priceless or worth something? Because somebody says it's worth something. Naomi thought she was worthless. Ruth saw worth in her. It's the whole concept. And watching auction shows and things, somebody says, "Oh, this thing I will value. I think you'll get $10,000 for it." Wow, $10,000 for that, man. I see these shows. I want to find in my house and see if I've got anything worth $10,000. I don't. But it's not so much, is it worth $10,000 or will somebody pay $10,000 for it? Like a Spider-Man comic. If you have issue 1 of Spider-Man, you've got something valuable. Even if you only paid $1, no, back in those days it was 5 cents to a quarter for a Spider-Man comic. They go for tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Matter of fact, some comic books have been sold for $1 million. Yeah, for a comic book. Why? It's not so much how much it's really worth in paper, but it's how much somebody's willing to pay for it. Same thing with people. It's the same thing with people. They're only feel valuable. They're only valuable when we give them value. Us. Don't take me wrong on that one. I don't want to sit there and say everybody's worthless. We're not worthless. God saw in us value. God paid the ultimate price for us by sending His Son to die for us. So God sees value in people. God saw value in widows by telling people to take care of them. God saw value with orphans and foreigners and telling people to take care of them, make sure they have a special place in your life. We are commanded, commissioned to show value to people who think they're worthless, who society deems worthless. Showing them the value that God has placed on them. That is redemption. That is how we redeem people, by giving them value. He could take us into political strands, and we could talk about several different things about, hot-blooded issues that are out, hot-button issues that are out there. I try to avoid that. But when we start devaluing people and saying they're worthless, it has ramifications that expands the room, this place. But if we start valuing human beings, starting with the people sitting next to you, starting with people outside the door, starting with, then going with the people you eat lunch with, people you're in class with, people you work with, people you ride on the train with, people you see on the street, people that you come across on a daily basis who are feeling like they're worthless until we tell them how much they're worth. That's our job. That's our responsibility. That's what Ruth did with Naomi. Even though Ruth probably, she was in the same boat. We're in the same boat. They say Christianity is just one beggar telling another beggar where to find the bread. One person giving another person value and showing them how much God values them.